I received the link on a quiet Tuesday morning just as I was getting ready to leave for my student teaching shift. It came from a coworker at the school, someone I barely knew with no subject line, just a YouTube link and a single sentence, "Is this you?" I clicked it without thinking. What loaded was a 15-minute true crime video already sitting at over 2 million views. At first, I didn't realize what I was watching. There was a YouTuber with a serious tone explaining the details of a fatal hit and run that happened in California in 2022. Then it cut to actual body cam footage. The moment I saw the car in the frame, red, crushed on the passenger side, I felt my breath catch. The moment I saw my boyfriend's face, bloodied and lifeless, blurred for sensitivity, my stomach twisted. And then I saw myself. There I was, 19 years old, drenched in blood, face completely exposed, sobbing uncontrollably in front of police officers. I was pleading, trying to explain what happened, gasping through tears, covered in my boyfriend's blood. I didn't even recognize my own voice at first. The video didn't hide anything about me. My name wasn't mentioned, but I didn't make it to school that day. I didn't even move. I just sat on my bed, frozen, rewatching pieces of the video in horror, skimming through the comments. "She's so dramatic. Who cries like that? Kinda sus that she survived and he didn't. I bet she was texting and driving. What a show." They were tearing me apart like I was a character in a movie, like I hadn't lost the person I loved most in that crash. It was 3 years ago, but for me it had only started to fade into something survivable. I had rebuilt myself in quiet ways: therapy, school, routines, goals. I was going to graduate this year. I was becoming a teacher. I had kept that night buried, too painful to speak of, but now it was viral. And as if that weren't enough, the video had been uploaded on the exact anniversary of his death. Same day, same hour, I checked the channel and saw it had millions of subscribers. The thumbnail was stylized, the title read, "Girlfriend watches boyfriend die in shocking body cam footage, real crime exposed." There was dramatic music. The narrator's voice was almost gleeful in its tension, like he was excited to take viewers through every unbelievable moment. I didn't remember giving anyone permission to use my image. I didn't remember signing a waiver for my trauma to become entertainment, but apparently I didn't need to. Apparently surviving tragedy in public makes you fair game. That night I received a message from the school's assistant principal, very polite and professional. "Elena, we've been made aware of some viral content involving you. Please let us know if you'd like to talk." That was it. My boss now knew the most humiliating version of me possible, the broken, panicked girl I had worked so hard to leave behind. And she had seen it without context, without warning, probably thinking I was unstable, maybe even unfit. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept seeing my face flash on screen, frozen in a scream. I thought of how I had once asked the officers at the scene if anything I said or did would be made public. They'd said no, just internal reports. I'd believed them. And now, 3 years later, a YouTuber decided that the trauma wasn't mine to keep. I was no longer a person. I was a story, a thumbnail, a reaction. But what that channel didn't expect was that I wasn't 19 anymore. I wasn't powerless. I was angry. And I was done letting strangers profit off my pain. They blurred the blood, but they forgot to blur me. And that would be their mistake. The night of the accident is one I've relived in my head more times than I can count, though it had been years since I'd spoken of it aloud. There's something about trauma that teaches you to go quiet, to bury your pain beneath layers of silence so that others don't get uncomfortable. But seeing that video, seeing my worst moment carved out and dressed up for strangers to consume, ripped the lid off everything I'd buried. And now, whether I wanted to or not, I remembered it all, every second. It was September 18th, 2022. I was 19 in my second year of college and still trying to figure out who I was. My boyfriend Mason was 21, a senior studying mechanical engineering, full of wild ideas and even wilder optimism. We had just come from a late-night concert in Santa Monica, something spontaneous and completely unplanned. It had been one of those perfect nights, music vibrating in our bones, street tacos after the show, the ocean air cutting through the city heat. We laughed until my sides ached. I remember telling him, in the most casual way, "Don't ever leave me." He grinned and kissed my forehead like it was the easiest promise in the world. He said, "Not in this lifetime." We were driving back on the 10 freeway, windows down, music low, and I remember thinking how rare it was to feel so safe. I wasn't even looking at the road, I was looking at him. And then it happened. One moment we were in motion, the next a blinding light from the driver's side. A truck had run the red light at the intersection just off the exit ramp. I don't remember the impact itself, just the sound. The crunch of metal, the sharp pop of exploding glass, the high, inhuman scream that I didn't realize was mine until later. The car spun, or flipped, or maybe both. I couldn't tell. And then there was silence. When I came to, everything was upside down. I was pinned in the passenger seat, bleeding from my scalp, my leg numb, my chest tight with something I couldn't identify. Mason wasn't moving. There was blood, too much of it. I remember reaching for him, trying to wake him up, whispering his name, then screaming it. The driver who hit us had already fled. It was a hit and run. That part became the headline later. Tragic hit and run, kills promising student, as if that summed up everything that was lost. But in that moment, none of that mattered. I just wanted him to open his eyes. The body cam footage picked up from when the first responders arrived. They found me still gripping his arm, covered in his blood, sobbing and panicked. I had a concussion. I was barely coherent. I didn't even remember most of what I said, only that I kept asking if he was okay, even after they told me he wasn't. I was taken to the hospital, sedated, kept overnight. I had a fractured wrist, a concussion, and deep bruises down the entire left side of my body, but I walked out alive. Mason didn't. The days after were a blur. His family didn't blame me. They hugged me at the funeral, cried with me, said Mason loved me and that he wouldn't want me to carry the guilt. But I carried it anyway. Survivors always do. I dropped out of school for a semester. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't drive. I kept thinking if I had asked him to wait one more minute before we left, if I'd made him take a different road, if I'd just done something, anything. My therapist called it survivor's guilt, said it was common, but nothing about it felt common. Eventually, time started doing what it does. I went back to school, finished my degree, started my credential program. I threw myself into becoming a teacher because it gave me something to focus on that wasn't myself. I started journaling, working out, volunteering. I stopped bringing up Mason in conversation, not because I didn't think of him, but because I couldn't stand the look people gave me when I did. That quiet tilt of the head, that soft, "I'm so sorry," like he was a footnote, like I hadn't watched my future die in front of me. In those years of rebuilding, I never once looked up the footage. I knew the police had body cams and I'd signed statements and given interviews, but I was told the graphic footage wouldn't be released, that it was sensitive, that it would remain with the investigators and the legal team. The man who hit us was eventually caught, tried, and sentenced. I didn't go to court. I couldn't. I wrote a statement that was read aloud instead. I thought that would be the last time my pain had to be public. When I saw my face in that YouTube video, all of that came rushing back. The blood, the panic, Mason's still body, the sound of my own voice screaming his name. But now, it wasn't just my memory, it was someone else's content. Someone had taken everything I survived and turned it into a thumbnail. They didn't care that I had fought for 3 years to feel human again. They didn't care that Mason's family had chosen privacy. They didn't blur my face, not once, but they blurred the worst parts of Mason, like that somehow made it okay. It wasn't just the footage, it was the narration too. The YouTuber called me the girlfriend, as if I didn't have a name. He described my actions like he was recapping a movie. "Watch closely here. This is the moment she realizes he's gone." Then he replayed it twice, slow motion. He even added background music, soft, tragic piano over the sound of my sobs, like it was a trailer. Like it was entertainment, and the comments mirrored his tone. Some viewers were sympathetic, most weren't. They picked me apart, my face, my voice, my reaction. "She's hysterical. She's fake. She probably caused the crash." I spent hours reading them. I knew I shouldn't, but I couldn't stop. It was like a second accident, and I was rubbernecking my own destruction. But something else started to happen as I read. Beneath the horror, the panic, the humiliation, a new feeling began to rise. Rage. Cold, sharp, focused rage. I had spent years letting people tell me how to feel, when to speak, how to grieve. I had tried so hard to stay invisible, to rebuild quietly, but this man, this stranger, had pulled me back into the spotlight without my consent, and now millions of people saw me only as a sobbing girl on the side of a road. That wasn't who I was anymore. I wasn't 19, I wasn't broken, and I wasn't going to be silent. If they wanted a story, I'd give them one, but it would be mine, and it would end with justice. I started by trying to do things the right way, or at least what I thought that meant. I flagged the video on YouTube for privacy violation. It took me 5 tries just to figure out the category to report it under, because apparently my trauma is now viral wasn't an option. I submitted a detailed explanation, linked timestamps, and described exactly what was happening in the footage. There was no blurring of my face, no effort to ask for consent, no respect for my privacy or dignity. I thought it was clear-cut, but when I got the automated email back less than 24 hours later, it simply said the content did not violate community guidelines. No explanation, no contact, just silence. Next, I sent an email directly to the creator. His business address was listed in the About section of his channel. I kept it calm, professional. I told him that I was the woman in the video he'd uploaded, that I had never given consent for my image or trauma to be used, and that I was asking respectfully for him to remove it. I even appealed to his decency, told him that this video was harming my future, my mental health, my professional reputation. I got no reply, not even a fake sorry, just more silence. The video stayed up, the views climbed. I looked up his channel again, this time with new eyes. I had been too emotionally wrecked to look at anything but the video itself at first, but now I was methodical. He had over 4 million subscribers. He had playlists dedicated to real body cam reactions, emotional breakdowns, and raw footage, grief caught on tape. My stomach turned as I scrolled through thumbnails of people crying, collapsing, screaming. Some of the titles read like punchlines. Teen learns her mom didn't survive. Her reaction will break you. Or watch this man realize his life is over. He wasn't telling stories. He was mining human pain and selling it with ad revenue. And the worst part? He wasn't breaking any laws. At least, not in the way that platforms chose to enforce them. I began digging deeper. Who was this man? What gave him the right to make a brand out of other people's worst moments? I found out his name was Matt Larson. He wasn't a journalist. He didn't have any kind of legal or ethical training. He had started the channel in 2019 after losing his job in finance and quickly found that tragedy sold. I even found an interview he gave once on a podcast where he said, the rawer the emotion, the better the click-through rate. My footage, my sobbing, my blood-streaked face, that was content to him. Just another spike on a graph. For a moment, I felt completely powerless. I didn't have a legal team. I didn't have millions of followers. I was just a 22-year-old student trying to become a teacher. I didn't have money to throw at lawyers or media clout to make a scandal go viral, but I had something else. My voice, and I wasn't going to let someone else narrate my story anymore. That's when I posted on TikTok. I didn't show the footage. I didn't name him. I just sat down in my room, turned the camera on, and told the truth. I said 3 years ago, I survived a fatal crash. Last week, I found out that a YouTuber with millions of subscribers posted full body cam footage of me at the scene. My face wasn't blurred. My breakdown was narrated. It's now one of his top videos. I didn't consent, and I wasn't warned. I'm telling my side because I didn't get the chance before. I uploaded it and went to bed, thinking maybe a few hundred people might see it. When I woke up, it had over 600,000 views. By the end of the day, it was over 2 million. People were outraged. The comments flooded in. Support, shock, other stories. I wasn't alone. There were others. Someone said their sister's suicide footage had been used in a similar video. Another person recognized their cousin's face from a viral breakdown video and had no idea it had even been recorded. I started getting messages from digital privacy advocates, content lawyers, even journalists. I was invited to speak on a podcast. My inbox exploded. That's when I found out the video had been reposted by other channels, reaction channels, breakdown analyzers, people who exist solely to piggyback off someone else's content. And every time someone reacted to it, my face spread further. The original video had already crossed 5.8 million views, but now it was everywhere, and even though my TikTok was exploding with support, none of it made the original footage go away. At first, I didn't want to go legal. I told myself it would be too messy, too public, but then I thought about Mason, about how the video disrespected him, too, about how the person I was in that footage, bleeding, crying, broken, was still me, and I deserved to be treated like a person, not an algorithmic trend. I reached out to one of the people who'd messaged me, an attorney who specialized in internet defamation and privacy violations. Her name was Claire, and she didn't talk to me like I was just another case. She was furious. They used your image without consent. They monetized your trauma, and depending on how the footage was obtained, they may have violated multiple rights. We started documenting everything: screenshots, timestamps, the original news coverage. My attempts to contact Matt Larson. Claire explained that while public records and police footage were sometimes considered fair use, the use of identifiable individuals, especially in a state of medical emergency or psychological crisis, was legally gray. She said that's where they always slip up. They think just because it's public data, they can use it however they want, but emotional exploitation isn't protected speech. Meanwhile, I kept talking. I did an Instagram live, I answered messages, I shared my story with more clarity, more power each time. Other creators started covering the situation. Some of them with millions of followers posted side-by-side breakdowns of how Matt had used the footage and how I was fighting back. He stayed silent, his channel didn't comment. But the video stayed up. Until the pressure started getting to him. One morning I woke up to find that the video was gone, not just unlisted, deleted. In its place was a short apology video titled, "Addressing Recent Concerns." I watched it. He didn't say my name. He didn't admit to anything. He just sat in front of a camera and read from a script. Some viewers have expressed concern over certain videos on this channel. I want to apologize if anyone was affected. My intent was always to raise awareness about real-world issues, and I deeply regret any harm caused. It was the fakest thing I'd ever seen. But I didn't care. Because I wasn't finished, apology or not, the damage had been done. I had lost sleep, I had relived trauma, my face had been seen by millions, and now, thanks to Claire, I was preparing to file a formal lawsuit, not just to take down one video, but to make sure no one else got away with it again. They had turned me into a story, but they forgot something fundamental. I wasn't a clip. The moment we officially filed the cease and desist letter, everything shifted. Claire had warned me that the YouTuber might ignore it, or worse, try to weaponize it by painting himself as the victim of censorship. But part of the legal process required us to give him the opportunity to remove the video voluntarily before proceeding with a lawsuit. So we sent the letter, professionally worded, backed by citations, and reinforced with a clear explanation of what would happen if he refused. It wasn't just about YouTube's guidelines anymore. It was about the right to control your own likeness, especially in moments of trauma. And while fair use laws were complicated, Claire believed we had a strong case, especially because of how the footage had been edited, narrated, and monetized. Her exact words were, "This wasn't documentation. This was exploitation dressed up in legalese." We sent the letter through multiple channels: email, registered mail, even through YouTube's legal complaint portal. We documented every step, but just like before, we received no acknowledgement, no response. The video had been deleted, yes, but there were still mirror uploads floating around on secondary accounts. His silence wasn't an admission of guilt, it was a tactic. He was waiting to see if we'd fold, hoping we'd settle for the takedown and move on. But I wasn't interested in silence. I wanted change. And I wasn't alone. After my TikTok and the news coverage that followed, I started hearing from others, people whose images had been captured in moments of crisis and turned into content without their permission. A woman whose 911 call after a home invasion had been uploaded and dissected in a reaction video. A teenager whose overdose had been used in a cautionary tale series. A father who recognized his daughter's voice crying in the background of a dispatch recording played in a podcast. Some of them had tried to fight back too. Most had failed. But now they were contacting me, asking how I was doing it, offering to stand with me. That's when I realized this wasn't just personal anymore, it was systemic. Claire suggested we strengthen our case by turning it into a multi-party complaint. If we could show a pattern of exploitation, multiple victims with similar experiences, we could argue that this wasn't a one-time ethical slip. It was a business model built on consent-free trauma harvesting. I agreed immediately. Together, we reached out to other victims and started collecting affidavits. We gathered screenshots, timelines, and monetization data. One woman, whose father had died in a fire, shared how her screams had become part of a viral TikTok audio clip. Another had lost a child in a mall shooting and later found her raw interview uploaded under the title, Heartbreaking moment, a mother finds out her child is gone. In every case, the content had been edited, stylized, and uploaded for views, and in none of them had consent ever been requested. We started calling it digital grief trafficking, the idea that your pain could be packaged, processed, and profited from like a commodity. It sounded dramatic at first, but the more we looked into it, the more accurate it felt. There were entire channels dedicated to nothing but real-time human breakdowns. The internet was a machine, and our grief was the fuel. And it wasn't just YouTube. These videos were cross-posted to Facebook, Twitter, even short-form clips on Instagram Reels. They were stitched into commentary videos, used for clickbait thumbnails, turned into memes and reaction GIFs. Grief was going viral, and no one had signed up for it. When we filed the lawsuit, Claire helped me issue a press release. We kept it focused and clear. This wasn't an attack on free speech or journalism. This was about boundaries, about consent, about dignity, and the response was overwhelming. Media outlets picked it up, The Verge, Wired, even the Washington Post ran a piece titled, "Whose Pain Is It Anyway?" I was interviewed on local news, asked to speak on podcasts, even invited to a digital ethics conference. For someone who had spent so long trying to disappear, it was a strange and uncomfortable spotlight, but it wasn't about me anymore. It was about everyone who'd been reduced to a thumbnail and a headline. Matt Larson, the YouTuber, finally responded, not to me, not to Claire, but in a live stream to his audience. He titled the stream, "Why They're Trying to Cancel Me." I watched it in full. He never used my name, but he referred to me as a certain girl and claimed I was weaponizing victimhood to silence truth. He framed the lawsuit as an attack on the First Amendment and said people like me don't understand journalism. At one point, he even said if people are in public spaces or caught on body cams, they're part of the story. That's just how it works. His followers flooded the comments with support, attacking me as clout-chasing, weak, and sensitive. It was surreal. This man had broadcast my grief to millions and now claimed he was the one being attacked? I thought it would crush me, but instead it made me feel more certain than ever. We pressed on. Claire submitted additional documents. We filed requests to YouTube demanding full earnings data on the original video. The numbers were staggering. Tens of thousands of dollars made off ad revenue, affiliate links, sponsorships tied directly to that footage. The platform resisted at first, but with mounting public pressure and media coverage, they eventually cooperated. We learned that the video had been recommended by YouTube's algorithm over 500,000 times in the first 72 hours. It had been labeled high engagement. I thought about that word, engagement, and how far removed it was from humanity. I didn't engage. I screamed while holding the hand of the man I loved as he bled to death. But to the system, that was content. The legal process was slow, but progress was steady. Meanwhile, Matt's reputation was starting to fracture. Former collaborators distanced themselves, sponsors dropped out, reaction videos criticizing him gained traction. He tried to pivot to other content, interviews, commentary, but his core audience was built on voyeurism, and without that, he was fading. His subscriber count dropped, his uploads slowed, and then one day his channel disappeared. He didn't delete it entirely, he just wiped it. Every video gone. No explanation, no final message, just silence. It should have felt like a victory, and in a way it did, but it also reminded me how temporary justice can feel in a digital world. The damage had already been done. But this was about more than punishment. It was about creating a line in the sand so that others knew there were limits. That just because someone's at their lowest doesn't mean you get to profit off their fall. And for the first time since the video surfaced, I felt something that had been missing for weeks. Relief. Quiet, tentative, real. It wasn't over, but it was changing, and this time, I was the one telling the story. When the news broke that Matt Larson's channel had been wiped clean, I received a flood of texts, emails, and DMs congratulating me, calling it a win, telling me justice had been served, and I understood why people saw it that way. After all, it looked like the end of the story, predator silenced, victim victorious, but I knew better. Removing the video, Claire and I continued pushing forward with the lawsuit. Despite the deletion of the content, we had already filed claims based on past damages, and the earnings had been recorded and documented. The revenue generated from my footage alone, along with several others we had included in our multi-party complaint, gave us a concrete financial foundation for damages. More importantly, we were now seeking to establish legal precedent for what constitutes a violation of privacy and emotional distress when it comes to publicly available content. We weren't just asking for compensation, we were asking the court to define the limits of acceptable content creation in a digital age where empathy often takes a backseat to engagement. At the same time, I began speaking more openly and consistently. I did interviews with journalists who were covering the broader implications of the case. I appeared on 2 podcasts centered around internet ethics and digital rights. I wrote an op-ed for an education journal tying my experience to the values we teach students about consent, empathy, and media literacy. Everywhere I spoke, I emphasized the same truth. Just because something is legal doesn't make it ethical. Just because a moment is captured doesn't mean it's yours to share. And just because you can edit someone's pain into a digestible story doesn't mean you should. One of the most impactful things that happened during this time was a connection I made with a professor from a media studies program who reached out after reading about the lawsuit. She invited me to speak at her university, not just to journalism students, but to digital creators, communication majors, and those studying law and ethics. I hesitated at first. Public speaking still made me nervous, but I knew how important this was. The next generation of content creators needed to hear from someone on the other side of the lens. So, I agreed. When I walked into that lecture hall and saw a packed room, it struck me that maybe the people who needed to understand this most were finally starting to listen. I told them the whole story, not the version polished by headlines, but the messy, painful human one. I talked about Mason. I talked about waking up to find my face on a viral video. I talked about the fear that my future as an educator might be derailed by a moment I didn't choose to share. I talked about rage and grief and how the worst part wasn't even the footage itself. It was the way the world treated it like entertainment. I could see their faces shift as I spoke. Some were horrified, some looked uncomfortable, one young woman cried, and when I finished, the silence that followed felt like something sacred. A moment of reflection in a space usually filled with noise. After the talk, a student came up to me and said, "I used to want to make videos like that. I thought they helped tell stories people needed to hear, but now I realize I was only thinking about the audience, not the people in the footage." That moment stayed with me for days, because that's what this had become about, not just protecting myself, but changing the way we think about content, attention, and whose stories get told, and how. Meanwhile, back in the legal world, we received word that the court had accepted the core of our case for trial. Claire called me with the update, her voice calm but excited. It meant we were moving forward, that this wouldn't quietly disappear into paperwork and settlements. It would be heard, in front of a judge, possibly even a jury. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. I had braced for pushback, but so far things were aligning in a way I hadn't dared to hope for. And then came the email that would change everything. It was from a representative at YouTube, not some generic auto-response, but an actual legal liaison from the platform. They said they had been following the case closely and were evaluating internal policies in response to growing concerns. They asked if I would be willing to participate in a private panel alongside other experts and stakeholders to help shape a new approach to consent and trauma content. I read the email 3 times before responding. It felt surreal. For so long, I'd been screaming into the void, begging for someone to take responsibility, and now the platform that had amplified my pain was asking me to help build something better. I agreed cautiously. The panel included digital privacy advocates, mental health professionals, educators, lawyers, and even a few creators who had made the shift away from reaction-based content toward more responsible storytelling. The discussions were intense, sometimes emotional, often frustrating, but also productive. I shared my story, others shared theirs, and slowly a framework began to emerge. A new draft policy was proposed, one that would require creators to obtain verifiable consent when using identifiable footage involving trauma or psychological distress. Violations would be flagged and removed. Repeat offenders could face demonetization or removal. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. The announcement of the policy change came just weeks later. YouTube released a statement emphasizing their commitment to responsible storytelling and acknowledging that while public content can inform, it should never exploit. My name wasn't mentioned, but I didn't need it to be. I knew what role I'd played in that shift. I'd gone from being a nameless girl in a viral video to someone helping define what ethical content should look like. But perhaps the most unexpected outcome came when I received a call from the principal at the school where I had been interning. She had seen everything, read the articles, watched the clips, followed the case. I expected her to be hesitant, maybe even uncomfortable. But instead, she said, "Elena, what you've done took courage. If anything, it makes me more confident in your ability to lead a classroom." Then she offered me a full-time position starting in the fall. I cried when I hung up. Not because of the job offer, though it meant everything, but because for the first time in a long time, I felt like the future wasn't something being taken from me. It was something I was building, brick by brick, with my own hands. I had taken back control. I had spoken out. I had faced down a system that saw me as a commodity and forced it to see me as a person. Justice didn't come in a single moment. It came in pieces. Through every email sent, every interview given, every legal form filed, it came through solidarity, through persistence, through refusing to be silent. And while the scars of what happened will always be part of me, so will the strength I found in fighting back. This chapter wasn't supposed to exist. I was supposed to stay quiet, to be consumed and forgotten, but I chose to speak. I chose to push. And now, because of that, things are changing, not just for me, but for everyone who's ever been turned into content without their consent. The court date arrived on a gray morning in early spring, the kind of day where the air feels still and heavy, like it's waiting for something to happen. I woke up nauseous. No amount of preparation or confidence could fully settle the nerves that came with walking into a courtroom, knowing I would have to relive everything in front of strangers, judges, lawyers, clerks, and maybe even the press. Mason's mother had flown in the night before. She offered to come with me, and I was surprised by how much that meant. We hadn't spoken much over the past year, not out of anger, just distance, but her presence that morning felt grounding, like a quiet reminder that I wasn't alone. Claire had briefed me 100 times. We had gone over every detail of the case, every exhibit, every statement, every potential curveball. She had done the heavy lifting legally, but I was the story's heart. I was the testimony. And as much as I dreaded having to speak in that setting, I knew it mattered. This wasn't just a personal battle anymore. It was precedent. It was about setting limits in a world where every moment is one upload away from being devoured by millions. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, less cinematic. The judge was professional but warm, the kind of presence that commanded attention without posturing. Matt Larson wasn't there in person. His legal team represented him, of course, a pair of high-powered, polished men who looked like they had never once cried in their lives. They didn't look at me when I walked in, and I didn't care. I wasn't here for them. The opening statement set the tone. Claire spoke clearly, firmly, laying out the timeline and the core argument that my face, my voice, and my trauma had been used. Matt's lawyers responded predictably. They leaned on freedom of speech, fair use, public interest. They claimed the footage was protected, that my face was incidental, that the content was created to educate and inform, and that the emotional tone was subjective interpretation. They tried to paint Matt as a commentator, not a profiteer, a storyteller, not a thief. But it was hard to make that argument stick when they had to acknowledge that the original title of the video was "Girlfriend Watches Boyfriend Die. Unreal Reaction Caught on Tape." They downplayed the financials, saying monetization was standard practice, not a targeted scheme. Then it was my turn. I had to steady my hands before taking the stand. The bailiff swore me in, and I took a breath so deep it felt like I was pulling it from somewhere in my childhood. Claire's questions were familiar. We'd practiced them all. She led me gently through the events of the night, the aftermath, the discovery of the video. I spoke slowly, clearly, but by the time I described opening that link for the first time, my voice was shaking. I didn't cry. I didn't break down. But my voice betrayed the cost of the memory. When Claire asked me how the video affected me, I said the truth. It wasn't just about seeing it. It was about knowing that millions of people saw the worst moment of my life and treated it like entertainment. You didn't get to choose how people remembered me. I didn't even get to choose who saw me. I looked at the judge. If someone had filmed you crying at a funeral and then uploaded it for ad revenue, would that be okay? Even if it was legal, would it be right? There was silence after I stepped down. Matt's lawyers declined to cross-examine. I don't know if it was strategy or shame, but they let me walk away without trying to poke holes in my words. The rest of the day blurred. Claire called 2 more witnesses, experts in digital privacy and ethics, who testified about exploitation, harm, and precedent. One cited a study on the psychological effects of viral trauma footage. Another compared what happened to me to revenge porn. Not in content, but in principle. Private suffering distributed without consent for public consumption. The judge didn't issue a ruling that day. These things take time. But we knew we had made an impact. As we left the courtroom, Claire whispered, "Even if we lose, we already won. They can't pretend not to know anymore." I nodded, but deep down I wanted more than moral victory. I wanted something on record. I wanted the next girl who gets caught on camera sobbing in grief to have protection. I wanted the next creator who considers uploading someone else's breakdown to hesitate. 2 weeks later, we got the ruling. The court found that while the original footage may have been part of public record, the edited and monetized video featuring my face and voice constituted a violation of my right to emotional privacy and inflicted measurable reputational harm. The judge emphasized the distinction between news reporting and content repurposing. He wrote, "Freedom of speech does not absolve one from responsibility when that speech exploits identifiable trauma for financial gain." It wasn't just a win, it was a landmark. Matt Larson was ordered to pay damages, both compensatory and punitive. The amount wasn't astronomical, but it was enough to matter, enough to send a message. The ruling also compelled him to issue a formal apology, not a video, not a performance, but a signed legal statement acknowledging the harm caused. It was posted to his now barren channel, the only video left behind. No music, no thumbnail, just text on screen read by a flat voiceover. I used real people's trauma for profit. I understand the harm this caused and I take responsibility. It was hollow, but it was on record. After the ruling, Claire and I met with representatives from several advocacy organizations that had been following the case. They proposed creating a new initiative, a digital consent coalition, focused on lobbying for legislation that would regulate the use of trauma footage in media. I agreed to be a founding member. I didn't want anyone else to have to go through what I had. I had been made into content against my will. Now, I wanted to be part of rewriting the rules. And in the middle of all that, in the quiet moments between the noise, I got back to my life. I signed the contract for my first teaching position. I picked out decorations for my classroom. I met with the school counselor to develop a lesson on media literacy. I bought new clothes, new books, and for the first time in years, allowed myself to feel excited about the future instead of haunted by the past. The fear was still there sometimes. Trauma doesn't vanish with a court ruling. But I was no longer trapped in the video. I had stepped out of the frame. One afternoon, as I packed a box of materials for my classroom, I found an old photo of Mason and me taken just weeks before the accident. We were sitting on a park bench, his arm slung lazily around my shoulders, both of us squinting into the sun. I stared at it for a long time. He never got to see what happened next. He never saw the video. But I like to think that if he had, he would have been proud. Not just because I fought, but because I remembered who I was and made sure the world did too. The first day I walked into my classroom as a full-time teacher, everything felt surreal. The sun streamed through the tall windows, illuminating rows of tiny desks and brightly colored posters I'd hung myself. The whiteboard was clean and waiting, the bookshelf was full of stories I'd loved as a child, and the lesson plans I'd spent hours perfecting were clipped neatly on my desk. There was a soft hum of nerves in the air, mine and the students'. But beneath it all, something new had taken root in me. Not fear, not grief, but peace. A quiet kind, the kind you earn through fire. I had spent years trying to silence the part of myself that broke on the side of that road, and I had spent months learning how to give that part a voice, not just for me, but for every person who had been reduced to a moment, a clip, a statistic. I had taken something meant to shame me, to exploit me, and turned it into a story of strength. That mattered. It still does. I still get messages, some from strangers who watched my story unfold and felt something shift in them. Others from people who went through similar experiences and finally felt seen. There was one message in particular from a mother whose daughter had been filmed without her consent during a school emergency. "They said there was nothing we could do," she wrote. "But then I read about you. And I'm not staying silent anymore. I saved that one. It reminded me why I kept speaking even after the legal process ended. It reminded me that healing isn't about forgetting, it's about reclaiming, reframing, redefining the moment they tried to take from you. Matt Larson disappeared from the public eye not long after the court ruling. He tried to rebrand under a different name, but by then the internet had changed. There was a different tone now, a wariness around trauma content, a demand for accountability. Other channels began issuing preemptive statements about consent. Some creators pulled down their old videos. The platforms slowly started to pay attention. It wasn't a revolution overnight, but it was a shift. One that came because people like me refused to be voiceless victims. One that came because survivors didn't just endure, they fought back. I don't watch videos like that anymore. I used to, back before it happened, back when I thought they were informative or compelling, but now I know better. Now every time I see a thumbnail featuring a grieving face or a tragic moment, I wonder, did they agree to this? Did someone ask? If the answer is no, I scroll away. And when I talk to my students about media and storytelling, I teach them that just because you can tell a story doesn't mean it's yours to tell. That empathy must come before clicks. That dignity isn't optional. These aren't just lessons about the internet. They're lessons about being human. I still think about Mason, not every day, but often, in quiet moments, in the way certain songs catch me off guard, in the way a particular stretch of highway can still make my heart race. Grief has softened into memory, no longer sharp, but deeply etched. He didn't get to see the life I've built, the battles I've fought, the people I've helped, but I carry him with me, in the work I do, in the way I speak up, in the resilience he always saw in me even before I did. Somewhere in the mess of it all, I found my voice. Not the panicked one screaming in the video, not the broken one trying to disappear, but the steady one that rose in the courtroom, in the interviews, in the classroom. The one that said, I am not your story to sell. I am not your viral moment. I am not your content. I am mine. There's something sacred in reclaiming what was taken from you. There's something powerful in showing the world that you are more than what they tried to make you. And as I stood at the front of my classroom, smiling nervously at my students as they filed in for the first time, I realized that this was it, the moment I had fought so hard for. Not revenge, not rage, not even recognition, but wholeness. I had taken back everything that mattered, and now, finally, I was free,